What do hospice nurses notice in the first 5 minutes of meeting a patient that tells them someone may be in their final year of life? You're about to learn the 5 specific physical and behavioral changes that experienced hospice professionals watch for. Signs that give families critical time to arrange proper care, have important conversations, and ensure their loved one receives comfort and dignity. There's one physical sign involving the extremities that appears in nearly 90% of people within their last months. But most families don't recognize it until a nurse points it out. And knowing it early allows you to request interventions that significantly improve comfort. Carolyn called hospice when her 84-year-old father started refusing meals and sleeping most of the day. The nurse who arrived recognized 3 additional signs within minutes that Carolyn had been seeing for weeks, but didn't understand. Knowing what these signs meant gave the family 2 months to say what needed to be said and keep him comfortable at home. Sign 1. Changes in breathing patterns and increased respiratory effort. One of the first things experienced hospice nurses assess when they meet a patient is breathing, specifically watching for changes in rhythm, depth, and the visible effort required to breathe that indicate declining heart and lung function. Normal breathing in healthy adults is relatively regular and effortless, occurring between 12 and 20 times per minute without conscious thought or strain. When someone is entering their final months of life, breathing often becomes irregular, with periods of rapid, shallow breaths followed by slow, deep breaths, or even pauses between breaths that can last 10 to 20 seconds. This irregular pattern, combined with visible signs of breathing difficulty like using neck muscles, flaring nostrils, or gasping, tells hospice professionals that the cardiovascular and respiratory systems are struggling to maintain adequate oxygen delivery to the body. According to the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization and research from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, these irregular breathing patterns, particularly a specific pattern called Cheney-Stokes respiration, where breathing speeds up, then slows down in cycles with pauses in between, often appear weeks to months before death as the heart begins failing to circulate blood efficiently and the brain's respiratory control center becomes less responsive. This isn't the same as occasional shortness of breath from climbing stairs or brief coughing from a cold. This is persistent, progressive change in the fundamental pattern and effort of breathing that continues to worsen over time. The body is essentially running out of the cardiovascular capacity to deliver oxygen effectively, and breathing becomes the visible evidence of this internal failure. Russell's 79-year-old mother started breathing rapidly for about a minute, then very slowly for another minute, with occasional pauses of 10 to 15 seconds that terrified the family. The hospice nurse who evaluated her explained this irregular cycling pattern indicated her heart wasn't pumping strongly enough to circulate oxygen efficiently anymore, causing her brain to alternate between panic breathing and shutdown breathing. Sit quietly with your loved one today and observe their breathing carefully for 5 full minutes without talking or causing distractions. Count how many breaths they take per minute by watching their chest rise and fall. Listen for new sounds you haven't heard before, like rattling, gurgling, gasping, or labored breathing. Watch for irregular patterns where breathing speeds up, then slows down, or pauses between breaths. Note whether they're using neck muscles or appearing to strain while breathing. Write down everything you observe, then call their doctor immediately to report these changes and request evaluation. If the changes are dramatic, with long pauses or extreme difficulty breathing, call their doctor that same day or go to urgent care. Breathing changes indicate serious cardiovascular or respiratory decline that needs immediate medical assessment and often signals the need for hospice evaluation. Don't dismiss these changes as normal aging or temporary issues. Breathing pattern changes indicate major body systems failing and require professional intervention to ensure your loved one receives appropriate, comfort-focused care. Breathing changes indicate serious decline that needs immediate medical evaluation. Assess this today. Sign 2, progressive loss of appetite and refusal of food and fluids. Has your loved one stopped eating meals they once enjoyed enthusiastically and begun refusing even their absolute favorite foods and drinks? Progressive appetite loss that leads to eating very little or eventually refusing food and fluids entirely is one of the most consistent and universal signs that someone is approaching the end of life. This isn't about occasionally skipping a meal or having a smaller appetite on a bad day. This is about fundamental disinterest in eating and drinking that persists and worsens over weeks and months, often accompanied by statements like, "I'm just not hungry," "Food doesn't taste right anymore," or "I don't want anything." When the body begins the natural dying process, the digestive system slows down dramatically and eventually stops functioning normally because the body no longer needs the same energy intake and can't process nutrients effectively. The Mayo Clinic and extensive palliative care research identify progressive appetite loss, leading to refusal of food and eventually fluids as one of the most reliable indicators that death is approaching within weeks to months, occurring naturally as the body's metabolic needs decrease dramatically and the digestive system begins shutting down as part of the dying process. This happens because failing organs can't process and utilize nutrients properly anymore. The stomach and intestines slow their movement. The liver can't metabolize food effectively. The body stops sending hunger signals because it fundamentally doesn't need or want food anymore. Forcing food at this stage doesn't help and often causes significant discomfort, nausea, vomiting, or dangerous aspiration where food goes into the lungs. The body knows what it needs, and what it needs at the end of life is not more food. Clarence, 81, who loved his wife's cooking passionately for 55 years of marriage, suddenly showed absolutely no interest in eating and only took a few small bites when strongly urged. Within 3 weeks, he stopped eating entirely and only sipped tiny amounts of water occasionally when his mouth felt dry. If your loved one has been refusing most meals for more than 3 consecutive days, eating less than a quarter of their normal portions, or showing complete disinterest in even their favorite foods, contact their doctor immediately to discuss what this means and request a hospice evaluation. Don't try to force food or make them feel guilty for not eating. Don't resort to aggressive measures like feeding tubes unless your loved one specifically requested this intervention in advance, because research shows these interventions don't extend life or improve comfort in end-stage patients and often cause additional suffering. Instead, focus on providing comfort measures like moistening their mouth with ice chips or mouth swabs, offering tiny amounts of preferred foods without pressure, and spending quality time with them that doesn't revolve around trying to make them eat. Ask the hospice team about proper mouth care to prevent painful dryness and cracking, which becomes the primary concern when someone stops drinking fluids. Appetite loss signals the body is naturally shutting down its digestive system, so get professional hospice guidance now on how to provide comfort rather than fighting against this natural process. Sign 3. Dramatic increase in sleep and decreased responsiveness. When your loved one starts sleeping 18, 20, or even 22 hours out of every 24-hour period and becomes increasingly difficult to wake up or engage with, even during their brief periods of wakefulness, hospice nurses immediately recognize this progressive somnolence as the body and brain conserving the last reserves of energy as major systems fail. Normal elderly adults might sleep 8 to 9 hours at night, with perhaps one afternoon nap totaling maybe 10 hours daily. But when someone approaches the end of life, sleep becomes the dominant state, with wakefulness becoming brief, confused, and effortful. The person seems to be drifting away mentally even before their body stops functioning completely, existing mostly in a twilight state between sleep and consciousness. Harvard Medical School palliative care specialists note that this progressive somnolence, where patients sleep the vast majority of time and show markedly decreased alertness, orientation, and ability to engage even during brief wakeful moments, typically appears in the final months to weeks of life as the brain receives inadequate oxygen from failing circulation, as toxins accumulate from failing kidneys and liver, and as the body naturally enters a protective semi-conscious state that characterizes the final stages of dying. The brain requires enormous amounts of oxygen and energy to maintain full consciousness and cognitive function. When organs fail and circulation declines, the brain simply doesn't have the resources to stay fully awake and alert anymore. Sleep becomes the brain's way of protecting itself and conserving energy during the body's final decline. Nadine's 88-year-old aunt went from taking 2 short afternoon naps daily to sleeping almost continuously, except for very brief 5 to 10-minute periods of partial wakefulness. The hospice nurse explained her brain was keeping her in sleep mode because her failing heart and kidneys couldn't support full consciousness anymore. Track your loved one's sleep and wake patterns carefully for 3 consecutive days. Write down what time they fall asleep at night, what time they wake in the morning, and how long each daytime sleep period lasts. Add up the total hours of sleep in each 24-hour period. Note their level of alertness and responsiveness during wakeful periods, whether they're confused, whether they recognize family, and whether they can engage in conversation. If your loved one is sleeping more than 16 hours total per day and seems noticeably confused, disoriented, or difficult to engage when awake, this indicates serious neurological compromise from organ failure and demands immediate medical evaluation to discuss appropriate end-of-life care, including hospice referral. Don't try to keep them awake or stimulate them excessively. Allow them to sleep as much as their body demands, but do seek professional guidance about what this progressive somnolence means for their prognosis and care needs. Understanding that this excessive sleep represents the brain's protective response to system failure helps families stop trying to fight it and instead focus on being present during brief, wakeful moments and ensuring comfort. Excessive sleep indicates major body systems shutting down. Get professional assessment today. Sign 4. Mottled skin and cold extremities. Hospice nurses immediately check their patients' hands, feet, knees, and sometimes elbows for distinctive skin mottling and temperature changes that provide clear, visible evidence that circulation is failing and the cardiovascular system is redirecting whatever blood flow remains away from extremities toward vital organs in a last effort to keep the heart, lungs, and brain functioning. Mottling refers to a specific blotchy, lacy pattern of bluish, purplish, or reddish discoloration that appears on the skin, particularly noticeable on hands, feet, and knees. This happens because blood vessels in these areas are constricting and blood flow is becoming irregular and inadequate. Combined with extremities that feel cold or even ice cold to the touch, despite warm room temperature and blankets, these circulation changes tell experienced hospice professionals that the heart is failing and death may be approaching within days to weeks. According to palliative care clinical guidelines from the National Institutes of Health and widely accepted hospice assessment protocols, mottled skin appearing in distinctive bluish or purplish blotchy patterns, especially on the hands, feet, knees, and sometimes elbows, combined with extremities that remain cold even in warm environments, indicates severe cardiovascular decline, where the heart can no longer pump blood effectively to peripheral areas, and typically appears in the days to weeks, immediately before death. This is the body making a strategic choice about where to send its limited remaining blood supply. Fingers, toes, hands, and feet are sacrificed to preserve flow to the brain, heart, and lungs for as long as possible. The distinctive mottled appearance comes from areas where blood flow is still marginally present, alternating with areas where blood flow has essentially stopped, creating that characteristic blotchy, lacy pattern that's unmistakable once you know what to look for. Leonard's fingers and toes turned bluish-purple with a distinctive blotchy pattern and felt absolutely ice-cold despite being covered with warm blankets in a heated room. The hospice nurse recognized this specific mottling pattern immediately and explained it meant his heart wasn't effectively pumping blood to his extremities anymore because it was barely managing to supply his vital organs. Check your loved one's hands, feet and knees every day for color changes and temperature. Look specifically for bluish, purplish or reddish discoloration in blotchy patterns rather than uniform color. Feel their hands and feet to assess temperature, comparing them to your own hands and to their torso. If you observe distinctive mottling or extremities that remain cold despite warming measures, contact their doctor, hospice nurse, or call hospice services immediately, because this sign indicates death may be imminent within days to weeks. This is the time to gather family members who want to say goodbye, to ensure comfort measures are in place, and to honor your loved one's end-of-life wishes. Understanding what mottling means allows families to prepare emotionally and practically for imminent death, rather than being shocked when it happens. Mottled skin and cold extremities signal circulation failure and imminent decline. Recognize this sign and act now. Sign 5. Social withdrawal and decreased communication. When someone who was previously social, communicative, and engaged with family suddenly becomes withdrawn, stops initiating conversation, shows little interest in visits or interactions with loved ones, and appears emotionally detached, even from people and activities that mattered deeply to them, hospice professionals recognize this profound psychological withdrawal as part of the natural mental and emotional preparation for death. This isn't the same as depression, although it can look similar on the surface. This is a deeper, more fundamental disengagement from life, relationships, and the external world that characterizes the final psychological stage of dying. The person seems to be turning inward, letting go of earthly attachments, and preparing mentally and emotionally for the transition from life to death. Research from Stanford University's palliative care program shows that progressive social withdrawal markedly reduced communication, including shorter conversations and less initiation of interaction, and apparent emotional detachment from previously cherished loved ones and relationships occurs in over 80% of dying patients during their final weeks to months as a natural and nearly universal psychological process of preparing for death and releasing attachments to this life. This withdrawal serves a purpose. It allows the dying person to focus their limited remaining energy inward rather than outward. It helps them begin the emotional process of saying goodbye and letting go. It may even represent an instinctive understanding that death is approaching and a natural response to conserve emotional and physical resources during this transition. For families, this withdrawal can feel like rejection or abandonment, but it's not personal. It's simply part of the dying process. Wanda, 76, stopped answering phone calls from friends, cut family visits short after just a few minutes, and seemed emotionally distant and disengaged even with grandchildren she previously adored and lit up around. Her hospice nurse gently explained this. Withdrawal wasn't rejection, but rather Wanda's mind naturally preparing for death by releasing attachments and turning inward. If your loved one has shown marked withdrawal from social interaction, dramatically decreased communication, or emotional detachment from family and previously important relationships over a period of 2 weeks or more, request a hospice consultation to discuss whether this represents natural end-of-life psychological progression rather than treatable depression. Learn from hospice professionals how to maintain comforting presence without demanding engagement or making your loved one feel guilty for their withdrawal. Sit quietly with them, hold their hand, Speak gently without requiring responses. Play soft music they enjoy. Create peaceful, loving presence rather than forcing interaction they no longer have energy for. Understand that this withdrawal is their way of preparing for what comes next, and your role is to support that process rather than fight against it. Don't take it personally if they seem less interested in you or other family members. Their focus is shifting from this life to whatever lies beyond, and that's normal and natural. Social withdrawal signals psychological preparation for death. Understand and respond compassionately now. These 5 signs that hospice nurses assess immediately: irregular breathing patterns indicating cardiovascular and respiratory failure, loss of appetite and refusal of food as the digestive system shuts down, excessive sleeping with decreased responsiveness as the brain conserves energy, mottled skin with cold extremities showing circulation failure, and social withdrawal as psychological preparation for death. Provide families with crucial information about where their loved one is in the dying process. Recognizing these signs early doesn't mean giving up hope or accepting defeat. It means understanding what's actually happening, requesting appropriate comfort-focused hospice care rather than aggressive interventions that increase suffering without extending meaningful life, and using whatever time remains to provide dignity, peace, loving presence, and ensuring your loved one doesn't suffer unnecessarily. Knowledge brings power. The power to request hospice care that focuses on comfort, the power to gather family while meaningful interaction is still possible, the power to have important conversations, the power to honor wishes, and the power to provide the peaceful, dignified death that every person deserves. Have you noticed any of these 5 signs in your elderly loved one? Share in the comments what you're seeing and whether you've reached out for hospice evaluation, because your experience could help another family recognize these signs earlier and get proper care sooner. If someone you know is caring for a seriously ill elderly family member, share this video with them now, because this information could make the difference between struggling alone in confusion and getting professional help that improves everyone's experience during this difficult time.